Locks and bars, walls and wire, all these stand between the incarcerated and the outside world. But when passion meets prison and the power of love breaks through concrete walls, even the most fortified prison can seem vulnerable. Welcome to Love on the Run, an anthology of the most astonishing stories of lovers aiding their imprisoned partners to slip past the watchful eyes of justice. You'll question, can love truly conquer all? Strap in for this wild ride, because love isn't just a jailbreak, it's an escape.
It was the 4th of August 2008, and things were about to change for a certain inmate at Rockville Correctional Facility. 29-year-old Sarah Jo Pender had had enough of her imprisonment. She was ready to get out and start all over again, away from the bloody past, the messy trials, the countless appeals to have the evidence reassessed, away from anyone she knew and everyone who knew her. It was Sarah's point of view that she had already spent enough time behind bars. Sure, the world called her a murderer, a female Charles Manson, but she never strayed away from her version of the events. She was innocent, or at least almost innocent, but there wasn't and never had been any blood on her hands. Sarah Pender was 21 years old in 2000. Pender was a Purdue University dropout. She worked as a secretary. Her dreams of working in a particle accelerator lab or pursuing a career in biochemistry long gone, or at least put on hold. Her life was quite good as it was, especially since she'd met Richard Hull, who worked as a bouncer at a bar. The two of them had quickly fallen in love and moved in together. Pender and Hull shared their apartment with another couple, Andrew Cataldi, 24, and Tricia Nordman, 25. At 21, Pender was already a far cry from the ambitious student she'd once been. Her boyfriend, Richard Hull, had a criminal history that included 6 misdemeanors and 2 felony convictions for auto theft and residential entry. Her roommates, Cataldi and Nordman, were both fugitives with a background in drug dealing and forgery. And Sarah Pender knew her boyfriend Hull and Andrew Cataldi sold drugs from their place, but she didn't really mind. Things were going great, until they weren't. Richard Hull and Andrew Cataldi had a falling out, presumably because Cataldi had failed to include Hull in one of his drug deals. Hull had enough, and because he could not legally purchase firearms due to his criminal record, he allegedly persuaded Sarah Pender to purchase a weapon for him. On the morning of October 24, 2000, Hull and Pender drove to a local hypermarket where Sarah Pender paid for a shotgun and ammunition. What happened next is anybody's guess, despite the fact it all took place 23 years ago. Here's the official version. Richard Hull and Sarah Pender returned home around 11 p.m. that night. Pender headed out for a walk shortly after. Meanwhile, an argument broke out between Hull and Cataldi. The two men physically fought, but their brawl turned into a murder. Hull used the weapon Pender had purchased for him to kill both Andrew Cataldi and his partner, Tricia Nordman. Both of them were dead by the time Sarah Pender returned from her walk. Pender didn't recoil in horror. She didn't call the police. Instead, she helped her boyfriend place the bodies in the back of Hull's truck. The two of them drove away and placed the bodies in a dumpster. Hull was arrested in Noblesville on October 27th, and he confessed to the murders straight away. Pender was arrested the same day. Pender herself faced trial at Marion Superior Court in July 2002, but neither Pender nor Hull testified at the trial. The trial was ruthless, and despite the fact that no DNA evidence was found that linked Pender to the murders, the prosecution was hell-bent on proving her guilt. She was dubbed a master manipulator. The court heard that even though Richard Hull was the one who pulled the trigger, Pender pulled the strings. Larry Sells, the prosecuting attorney, called Sarah Pender the female Charles Manson, claiming her influence over Hull was akin to Manson's influence over his cult. Hull pleaded guilty to avoid trial. He claimed from the start that the murders had been Pender's idea, which further convinced the court. Despite this, Hull never backed his claim, never gave any indication as to why Pender would have wanted Cataldi and Nordman dead, but Hull claimed Pender had admitted her guilt in a letter she'd sent him in May 2001. Sarah Pender was found guilty and sentenced to 110 years in prison on August 22, 2002. And now, 6 years later, on August 4, 2008, she was ready to leave. Efforts to get her out of jail legally had always failed. It hadn't even mattered that Richard Hull himself, in a signed affidavit, had recanted and admitted the letter was a forgery. So Pender used all her resources to get herself out of jail and back to freedom. Rockville Correctional Facility, Indiana's largest state prison for women, was a medium security prison. But Sarah Jo Pender's escape plan didn't involve intricate machinations anyways. It involved feelings and money. On the morning of August 4, 2008, Pender sat in her cell, patiently waiting for the plan to unfold. Once she was out of her cell, she went to the prison's gymnasium. A change of clothes awaited her, provided by her accomplice, Scott Spittler. Scott Spittler had been a corrections officer at Rockville Correctional Facility for 5 years. He had a wife and kids, but he also had an ongoing sexual relationship with Sarah Pender, whom he thought was an intelligent, sexy woman. Once Pender let him know about her desire to break out of jail, Spittler agreed to help her. But this decision wasn't made entirely out of love. Pender promised him $15,000 if he helped her escape. Spittler just couldn't refuse the money. After Pender changed into civilian clothes, she proceeded to walk to the fueling area. Spittler was there, waiting for her in a van. Pender got into the van and hid under one of the seats. Spittler drove toward the prison gate, knowing surely that the van wouldn't be searched. Spittler drove Pender to one of the facility's parking lots. It was time for the second part of the plan. Jamie Long was waiting for Sarah Jo Pender in a car. Long and Pender had met in 2007 while inmates at the Marion County Jail. The two women formed a close, intimate relationship, with Long even calling Pender her wife. After being released from prison, Long would keep visiting Sarah Pender. It was during one of these visits that the older woman had agreed to help Pender escape. Pender got into Long's car. Relief hit her. She was free and almost safe. Long drove Pender to Indianapolis and gave her $140 before wishing her good luck and dropping her off. Now on her own, Sarah Jo Pender fled Indiana, hoping to find her new beginning somewhere else. Meanwhile, an inmate count revealed that Pender was missing. Authorities acted swiftly, and the prison was immediately put on maximum security lockdown. Surveillance tapes and the guard shack log revealed that Pender had been aided by Spittler, who was arrested the day after the escape on August 5th. Once arrested, Spittler didn't hold back and told investigators about Jamie Long's part in Pender's escape. Long was arrested 2 days later on August 7th. Pender moved to Chicago and managed to get a job as an estimator for a contractor. She used a fake name, Ashley Thompson, and settled as a good, law-abiding citizen in a North Side Chicago neighborhood. Authorities didn't cease their efforts to recapture her. TV show America's Most Wanted ran a feature on Pender in September 2008, a month after her escape. Pender was added to the U.S. Marshals 15 Most Wanted Fugitives list a month later, in October 2008. And perhaps her dream of freedom would have succeeded if not for a rerun of America's Most Wanted in December 2008. After seeing the rerun, one of Pender's, now Thompson's, new neighbors identified her as a fugitive and alerted the Chicago police. And just like that, Pender's apartment was surrounded by the police. The woman didn't resist arrest, but she denied she was Sarah Pender. After her escape, Pender was held in solitary confinement for 5 years. She was allowed to leave her cell for only 2 hours a day. She spent the rest of her time by herself, reading and trying to keep her mental sanity. She was transferred back to Rockville Correctional Facility in 2018. Sarah Pender's story is a controversial one, with many people believing her being convicted for murder is nothing else but a glaring system failure. More shockingly, Larry Sells, the prosecuting attorney who linked her to Charles Manson and worked to see her behind bars for 110 years, now believes Sarah Jo Pender to be innocent. Pender is now 43 years old. According to Larry Sells, justice is long overdue for Sarah Pender. Unfortunately, the legal system has to date failed her, but that grievous error can and should be corrected. Pender has spent most of her time in prison trying to appeal the verdict, and perhaps she will never stop. On March 25, 1999, John Killick was waiting in Silverwater's jail exercise yard. Killick knew what was coming. Or, more exactly, who was coming. At 57 years old, Killick was still very young at heart, and he was head over heels in love with an unusual woman, a 41-year-old librarian named Lucy Dudko. There was only one reason Killick was waiting in the exercise yard. Lucy was coming to rescue him. The couple had hatched a plan to get Killick out, and March 25th was the big day. Killick and Dudko met sometime in the mid-90s while at a party. The two of them fell hard for each other, despite their apparent differences. Dudko, who had a thick accent, was a Russian-Australian librarian. She had a slight frame and a kind face. Nothing about her appearance pointed to her inner strength, her resourcefulness, and dubious morals. As for Killick, he was a career criminal. Killick's childhood had been a comfortable one. But it all changed when he turned 17 years old and his mother committed suicide. That very day, Killick decided to leave home and make his own luck. 7 months later, he was in juvie. The first experience didn't determine Killick to seek out a more righteous lifestyle. In 1966, the man started his long career as a bank robber. He needed the easy money to fund his gambling addiction. As such, he acquired quite the reputation, becoming Australia's first decimal currency bank robber. Not even meeting Lucy Dudko was enough to get the man to settle down for long. In fact, maybe that was part of the attraction. While Killick was definitely a skilled robber and a dangerous man, he was widely regarded as a gentleman. He had never physically hurt anyone. Once Killick and Dudko met, they embarked on an affair before moving to Canberra. Soon after, police came knocking. Years before, Killick had violated parole there, and authorities wanted him back in jail for it. It didn't matter what the authorities wanted. Killick and Dudko were together. They were in love, and nothing was going to tear them apart. The couple took off, leaving everything else behind. To make a living, John Killick began doing what he knew best: robbing banks. But the man's luck ran out, and he was arrested and imprisoned in Silverwater Jail in Sydney. Killick and Dudko's romance didn't fade away. They stayed together through thick or thin. At one point, while Killick was appearing at a courthouse hearing in Queanbeyan in southeast New South Wales, Dudko suggested she could break him out of custody. She had a gun, and she was ready to break all hell loose in order to help her beloved. But John Killick told Lucy Dudko to abandon the plan. It was too risky. Instead, the two of them hatched a better plan. They had plenty of time. Dudko would visit Killick 3 times a week at his prison. That's when they came up with the idea to use a helicopter. Silverwater Jail was the perfect ground, both literally and figuratively, for an escape by helicopter. Some believe the prison guards may be too easily used as an airplane landing pad when Silverwater was first erected and later rebuilt for about $84 million. The prison's perimeter was once patrolled by armed guards, but they were retired in 1995 and replaced with security cameras. Security cameras, as you might have guessed, aren't able to shoot any would-be escapees. As Killick waited in the exercise yard, Lucy Dudko was carrying out her plan. She was determined to free her boyfriend, no matter the cost. On the morning of March 25, 1999, Lucy booked a helicopter joyride. The pilot, Tim Joyce, was to take her over the so-called Harbour Bridge track, which included the Olympic Stadium and Village, Sydney Harbour, and Manly. There was nothing out of the ordinary about Dudko's request. With the Sydney Olympics only a year away, many tourists booked flights near the site. What was unusual about Dudko, the pilot noticed, was she had 4 shopping bags with her. Still, the woman seemed harmless enough. The helicopter took off, and Tim Joyce, the pilot, started his usual routine. He began offering tidbits of educational commentary about the track. He attempted small talk and small remarks about the sights. But his passenger, Lucy Dudko, was far from interested in what the man had to say. Instead, she was fussing, agitated, and looking for something inside her shopping bags. As they neared the Olympic site, Dudko's interest was piqued. Was that a prison just ahead? She asked the man. Then, Dudko asked Joyce to fly around the prison. She wanted to get a better look. Joyce flew around the prison's perimeter. Dudko kept looking for something in her bags. And then, she finally found what she was looking for. The woman got out a 2-shot Derringer pistol. She pointed it at the pilot's head. "This is a hijack," she told him. Joyce immediately tried to activate the transponder, but he was out of luck. Lucy Dudko knew what a transponder was. John Killick's cellmate was a con man helicopter pilot, and he told Killick all about the transponder and what it did. If the pilot had gotten the chance to activate it, the device would have created a frequency at Sydney Control Flight Services, alerting them of a hijack. Dudko was well informed. In an instant, she hit the pilot's hand with the handle of her gun. She then turned off the transponder as well as the radio switch. Dudko instructed the pilot to land in the prison exercise area. The man had no other choice. It was either that or death. John Killick watched the helicopter approaching the yard. He was proud. Dudko was indeed a feisty woman. Other prisoners around him watched in awe, either too stunned to move or cheering. Then, most of them ran toward the prison building. Killick made his way toward the helicopter. Once John Killick got inside the chopper, he was the one to direct the pilot. Killick told Joyce to fly northeast to Macquarie University, about 6 miles away in Sydney's north, and land on Christine's Oval. Once they landed, Killick tied Joyce's arms and legs with a cord and told him to stay still for a while. Then, Killick and Dudko ran into a nearby bush. They watched Joyce untie himself and go into a nearby clubhouse, where he called the police. The couple then flagged down a car and, holding the driver at gunpoint, made their way to North Sydney, where they met up with some of Killick's old friends. Then, their trace was lost. The news of the prison escape took Sydney by storm. Calls from people claiming to have seen the couple were flooding in daily. Authorities quickly realized Lucy Dudko was the #1 suspect in the case. Media loved the story. It was a classic tale of gun-toting lovers, them against the world. The press dubbed Dudko as Red Lucy. The couple were named Australia's Most Wanted. The investigation took officers to Killick's ex-wife, Gloria's apartment. Apparently, Lucy Dudko and Gloria had struck up a friendship, and Lucy had been living in Gloria's apartment since Killick had been in prison. That's where the police discovered pages torn from flight magazines advertising helicopter joyrides over Sydney, and 3 videos: hostage, breakout, and fled. Dudko had certainly done her homework. It took authorities 45 days to catch John Gillick and Lucy Dudko. On May 8th, the two checked into Bays Hill Caravan Park in Sydney's west, renting a cabin under a false name. Apart from the false name, they'd done little else to disguise themselves. The two had only dyed their hair. Their cover was blown by the Caravan Park manager. Minutes later, their cabin was surrounded by police officers who used loud hailers to let the couple know their adventure was over. Dudko was convicted on 5 charges. She received a 10-year sentence. Killick was given a 23-year prison sentence. Their love story refused to die. For years, the couple exchanged more than 4,000 letters and 100 phone calls. They repeatedly made requests for permission to marry, but all of them were refused. Dudko was the one to call off the relationship. While in prison, she embraced religion and decided to move on with her life, without Killick. Lucy Dudko was released 7 years and 2 months after the escape. John Killick eventually got out of prison, on parole, and is now an author with 3 published books. It was morning on August 9, 2005, and the court hearing had just come to an end. Jennifer Forsyth Hyatte was ready to act. It was now or never. She either did it or not. But the woman knew not taking this chance wasn't really an option. She wanted to free George, her husband, and finally get to live the life she deserved. Jennifer was so sick of living for others, and it was high time she lived for herself. At 31 years old, the woman had already been married twice before she met George Hyatte. Jennifer had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and a long and messy list of relationships. As she sat in her blue Ford Explorer, watching the column portico of the Roane County Courthouse in Kingston, Tennessee, Jennifer knew there was nothing that she wouldn't do for George. Her gun was at the ready, the engine was running, and her heart wanted only one thing: to spare her husband a life in prison, away from her, away from freedom. A month before, the woman called her father, who was a former police officer, trying to convince him to give her a handcuff key. When the man refused, Jennifer devised another plan. Jennifer never had it easy, so she had to learn to be resourceful. Her first memory was of her parents' divorce. By the time she turned 15, Jennifer was no longer the little girl who loved horses. She was now someone who loved alcohol and drugs, someone whom older men saw as fair game. The summer before her senior year of high school, Jennifer met someone. When he asked her the big question, Jennifer said yes. The couple had 3 children, but children aren't enough to mend something that's inherently wrong, dangerous, and broken. Their marriage was filled with arguments, drug abuse, and heavy drinking. It didn't last. After another failed marriage and a few more affairs, Jennifer decided to turn her life around, so she took her kids and moved to Tennessee. In early 2004, Jennifer earned a diploma as a licensed practical nurse and took a nursing job at the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tiptonville, Tennessee. That's where she met him. Sure, she had had plenty of affairs, but George Hyatte was different. Jennifer had known it the very instant their eyes had locked for the first time. He was her soulmate, the perfect half, the one thing she had been missing all these years. The two of them fell in love, but not everybody was a fan of this lovesick behavior. 5 months after getting the job and meeting George Hyatte, Jennifer was fired after sneaking food into the prison for him. People couldn't understand why on earth a seemingly respectable woman with a good job would risk it all for a prisoner like George Hyatte. While Jennifer Hyatte stayed put in the car waiting, George Hyatte was pleading guilty to a robbery charge in the courthouse. But then the courthouse hearing was over, and it was time to act. Jennifer was ready. her eyes glued to the building's entrance. And then she saw George, her beloved husband, descending the few steps between him and the van that was going to take him back to prison, away from her love. In 2005, George Hyatte was a 34-year-old and serving a 35-year sentence for aggravated robbery and aggravated assault. His flirting with criminal life started when he was only a child, and at 17, Hyatte started racking up charges for burglary, theft, armed robbery, and striking an officer. By the time he was 21, he was already a repeated offender with a known tendency towards violence. But the man was also a smooth talker and a bit of a ladies' man. In November 2004, Jennifer and George applied for permission to marry. They were wed on May 20th, 2005. Now, a few months later, on August 9th, 2005, George was shackled and flanked by 2 guards, making his way toward the prison van. Jennifer didn't see the guards as 2 living, breathing people. Instead, she saw them as 2 obstacles preventing her happiness. She pulled up to the Tennessee Department of Correction transport van, and then she jumped out of the blue Ford Explorer, holding her gun firmly in her hand. Her husband George was stunned to see her, but he had put 2 and 2 together quickly and started encouraging her straight away. "Shoot him," George Hyatte yelled out. One of the guards, 56-year-old Wayne Cotton Morgan, grabbed his own gun, but it was no use. Jennifer Hyatte shot him 3 times in the abdomen. The man fell to the ground. He was dead. The other guard managed to shoot Jennifer, but in the meantime, George had made it to the car. The couple sped away before they could be apprehended. Jennifer drove despite her injury. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was the ecstatic feeling of being close to her husband, but she knew she couldn't stop for any reason. They were so close. Way too close to risk destroying everything she'd worked for only because of a small gunshot wound. She drove the Ford to a nearby Subway sandwich shop. The couple then abandoned the car and got into a golden Chevrolet minivan Jennifer had stolen from one of her patients in Hendersonville, Tennessee. They drove away and only stopped 4 hours later at a Lowe's in Florence, Kentucky. They needed a hacksaw to free George Hyatte from the burdensome shackles. The couple then rented a room in a motel about a mile away. They spent the night there, finally together. Finally free. Jennifer Hyatte took antibiotics and pain meds in order to cope with her gunshot wound. But once morning came, the couple knew they had to move again. They were still too close for comfort, too exposed. They were in danger. In the meantime, Jennifer dyed her brown locks black. They took a cab ride to Columbus, Ohio. At the start of the journey, they handed a cab driver 2 $100 bills and started pleading with him. They wanted the man to book them a room in a hotel under his name. But Mike Wagers, the driver, was suspicious about the two. The pair told him they were headed to an Amway convention, which further deepened his suspicions. In Wagers' experience, Amway representatives loved talking about the MLM company they worked for, but these two were really quiet. Still, he dropped them off at the destination. The couple checked into America's Best Value Inn in Columbus, Ohio. They were at ease, smoking Marlboros and munching on snacks and Mexican foods, but their happiness was about to turn sour. Once Mike Wagers got home in Kentucky, he started playing video games. As he was playing, a friend of his told him about the fugitives and the fact that the police had just found an abandoned golden Chevrolet minivan. That's when something clicked for Wagers. He called the police straight away, tipping them about the couple's location. The Hyattes were in their room when the phone rang. Jennifer picked it up and was met with the voice of U.S. Marshal Nikki Ralston. Ralston told Jennifer to get her husband, George, exit the hotel room, and follow the directions of the officers, who would be to their immediate right. They were surrounded. It was the evening of August 10th, 2005. Once the couple got out of their room, Jennifer started pleading with the officers. She asked them not to hurt her husband. Baby, it'll be okay. It'll be okay," she kept hollering at George Hyatte. Both of them were immediately taken to jail. Jennifer Hyatte pleaded guilty to first-degree murder on September 17, 2007. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She is currently serving her sentence at the Tennessee Prison for Women in Nashville. While in her initial cell in Ohio, Jennifer wrote several letters, but all of them were confiscated. She called those 2 days on the run with her husband the best of her life. George Hyatte pleaded guilty to all charges on March 9, 2009. He also pleaded guilty to first-degree murder of the guard Wayne Cotton Morgan. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. It was an early morning on April 29, 2022, and Vicki White was getting ready to put her plan into motion. She had given it much thought in the past few months. and now she was finally ready to do it. At 56 years old, Vicki White was working her last day on the job as an assistant director of corrections in Lauderdale County, Alabama. 17 years. That's how many years Vicki had spent as a corrections officer. During her career, Vicki won the Employee of the Year award 4 times, and she was set to win a 5th time for this last year of service. To anyone who worked with her, from other officers to Lauderdale County District Attorney Chris Connolly, Vicki was nothing short of an exemplary officer. Her work as an assistant director at the prison proved it. But in reality, Vicki White had a secret. After an unsuccessful marriage that started in 2002 and ended in 2006 because of drug use and abuse, and after her ex-husband's death in January 2022, Vicki was finally in love again. But to say the woman had an unconventional taste in romantic partners is an understatement. The new recipient of her love was Casey White, one of the inmates at the prison, one of the people Vicki was supposed to supervise and prevent from engaging in any further criminal behavior. In 2022, Casey White was 38 years old and already a prison connoisseur. The man had a long criminal record, which underlined his ruthlessness. Casey served his first stint in prison back in 2012, when he got a 3-year prison sentence for beating his brother in the face and head with the handle of an axe sledgehammer. But not even serving time was enough to make Casey a good, law-abiding citizen. In March 2016, he got an impressive 75-year prison sentence for 7 counts that included attempted murder and robbery. Only 4 years later, Casey confessed to an investigator for the 2015 stabbing death of a 59-year-old woman. Upon his confession, Casey was charged with 2 counts of capital murder and transferred to a detention center in Lauderdale County. That's where the criminal met Vicki White. There was nothing charming about Casey White, at least not to most people. The man stood 6 foot 9 inches tall and had his entire body covered in tattoos, some of them which were clearly white supremacist symbols. Even more, he was one of those prisoners who were deemed especially dangerous. Even armed officers were told to be more than cautious when approaching him. But the heart wants what it wants. Or perhaps in this case, Vicki White's heart was manipulated and coerced into caring for Casey White. We'll never know. What we do know is that the two of them, the seasoned corrections officer and the dangerous prisoner, started a romantic affair. Maybe the two of them thought their shared last name wasn't a coincidence, but a divine sign that they should be together. There are no exact details about who initiated the romance, but it's obvious which one of them had more to gain out of it. Vicki made sure Casey had more than enough food and peace, and then the woman made sure Casey would be free, using her position and her wits to engineer and facilitate a dramatic prison escape. At about 9:30 a.m. on April 29, 2022, Vicki White ordered her subordinates to prepare Casey White for transport from the county jail in Florence, Alabama, to a courthouse for a mental evaluation. After the evaluation, she told the other deputies she would seek medical attention because she wasn't feeling well. As the assistant director of the jail, the woman was very well aware of protocol. She knew transporting an incarcerated person alone was against protocol, but she had already thought it out. In order to ensure she'd be the only officer available for this alleged transport to the courthouse, Vicki had scheduled a van transport for that morning. Hence, several deputies had left minutes earlier with 2 vans transporting a dozen inmates, just before Vicki announced to her subordinates she'd transport Casey White to his mental evaluation. Nobody dared question the woman because of her position in the prison hierarchy. Casey White was fetched shortly after. Nobody knew about the romance. But in the months prior to the escape, Vicki and Casey spoke on the phone over 900 times. Most of these calls were sexually explicit. Their romance wasn't merely budding, it was already well established. Dressed in a black jacket and black pants, Vicki White held the door open so a handcuffed and shackled Casey White could emerge out of the prison. The differences between the two of them were striking. 56-year-old Vicki was only 5'5" and had long blonde locks framing her face. Casey White was 6'9", dressed in an orange prison outfit and covered in tattoos. His brown hair was shaved. Once Casey shuffled to the back seat of the patrol cruiser, Vicki drove the car away. But there was no mental evaluation planned for the day. It had all been a part of Vicki's carefully crafted plan to whisk Casey away from the prison. Not even 10 minutes after they departed from the prison, Vicki stopped the patrol cruiser at a shopping center parking lot in Florence. The couple exited the car. Vicki left her jail keys and her radio inside the car. She uncuffed and unshackled Casey. Together, they ditched the vehicle and started making their way further down the path of freedom. When they failed to return to the prison, the other deputies working that day started to grow suspicious. The patrol car was found abandoned in the parking lot at about 11 a.m. Officers called and called Vicky White, but to no avail. Soon, everyone at the prison found out that there had been no mental evaluation planned for the day. They had to face the truth. Casey White had escaped, and Vicky White, the prison's assistant director, had something to do with it. At first, Vicky's coworkers feared that the woman had been coerced and threatened in order to help Casey. But as authorities feared the worst and started their investigation, Vicky and Casey couldn't be happier. They had gotten to their getaway car, a copper-collared Ford SUV that Vicky had purchased only days before, using an alias, and were now on the road fleeing the state. Money wasn't an issue. Vicky had made sure of this too. In the weeks leading up to the escape, the woman sold her home in the tiny town of Lexington, Alabama, for $95,550. The sum was less than half of the house's market value. With tens of thousands in cash, Vicky could also insure some other necessities. After arriving in Williamson County, Tennessee, about a 2-hour drive north of Lauderdale County, Vicky and Casey abandoned the copper-collared Ford. The car was then found locked and abandoned. A tow truck driver transported the vehicle to a local tow lot, unaware of its origin. By 3:30 p.m. on April 29th, officials knew for sure that Vicky and Casey White were missing. In the initial official statements, Vicky was described as missing and endangered. But on May 2nd, a warrant was issued for the woman, charging her with permitting or facilitating an escape in the first degree. On May 3rd, Vicky and Casey were found in Evansville, Indiana. They drove in a Ford F-150 to a car wash in the city and then abandoned the car on the premises. They had another vehicle ready. This time they drove away in a Cadillac. On Monday, May 9th, 2022, a task force from Alabama descended on Evansville and teamed up with the deputies and marshals in Indiana. They were going to capture the fugitives once and for all. They scouted the area, but it wasn't until later that day when they found out the fugitives' whereabouts. Evansville detective Darren Richardson was driving home when he spotted the Cadillac in a motel parking lot. He got the license plate and tipped investigators. Vicky and Casey had paid a homeless person to use their identification in order to rent the motel room. Casey White was at the wheel. The car drove away. What happened was like a movie-like car chase. But it all stopped when a law enforcement official rammed the suspect's vehicle, sending it into a ditch. No one knows exactly what happened then, but when police reached the Cadillac, Vicky White had been shot in the head. Casey asked officers to help his wife, repeating that he didn't do it. It is unclear whether he was trying to further confuse officers by calling Vicky his wife. Vicky White died shortly after. Her death was ruled a suicide. Perhaps she couldn't imagine spending the rest of her life on the other side of bars. As for Casey White, the man was arrested. After 11 days on the run, his escape was to an end. He was transported back to Alabama. He was then transferred to the William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. In addition to being charged with escape in the first degree, he was also indicted for felony murder in connection to Vicky's death. Casey White's trial is expected to begin on April 17, 2023.